Welcome, Srinivas sir. Srinivas sir, if you could speak something, it'll be very helpful. We can check the audio connectivity as well.
Just a minute.
Wonderful, sir. You're audible.
I'm audible, na?
Yes,
Okay.
sir.
Okay. Because generally before starting we should keep mute and also stop video. I mean start. Okay. Okay. Now you can hear me, na?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
There should not be any problem because in the previous meeting there was a lot of connectivity issues. So if you are able to hear me, I think perfect.
Yes, sir. Loud and clear.
Good.
Good morning, Aditya sir. Could you just unmute yourself, speak so that we can check the audio?
Hello, Lakshman.
Yes, sir. Audible, sir.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
Dr. Sharma, shall I begin with the webinar session? वही होता है उसके अंदर का कंटेंट हम दोनों ने मांगा कुछ भी बोल दो Dr. Shishma, am I audible to you? Morning. And the webinar on application of multi-hazard risk assessment for risk-informed development planning. This webinar is jointly organized by National Institute of Disaster Management and RMSI. Firstly, I would like to welcome our Executive Director of NIDM, Major General Manoj Kumar Bindal. We welcome you to our webinar, sir. I would also like to invite our esteemed speakers for the session. Today we have with us Sri R. Srinivas, Metropolitan and Union Territory Division, Town and Country Planning Organization, Government of India. Aditya Krovide, Assistant President, Risk and Insurance, RMSI Private Limited, and Srimati Shivangi Chavda, a network of civil society organization for disaster reduction. We welcome all the esteemed speakers to our webinar session. I would also like to welcome our coordinator, Dr. Shishma Guleria from NIDM. And lastly, our fellow participants who have joined with us, who are from multidisciplinary backgrounds. I welcome you all. Moving ahead, I'll be seeing the objectives of the webinar. The first objective of the webinar is understanding the procedure for carrying out a multi-hazard risk assessment in different settings and different types of hazard. Second objective is applying sensing of hazard assessment and elements at risk mapping, providing an overview of quantitative risk assessment to support disaster risk conscious development, and view from the front lines on how communities can be involved in risk-informed development. These were the objectives of the webinar. I would like to invite Lakshman Shrikant, and I would request him to further introduce the speakers of the session. Over to you, Lakshman.
Thank you very much, Aradhna. So basically this, since the International Decade for Natural Disaster Reduction in the 1990s, we have moved a long way ahead in understanding, managing, and reducing the risk due to natural and anthropogenic hazards. One of the major transitions that has been is in our understanding of disasters per se, as the disasters are not natural, and the impacts, the hazards are natural, and the impacts due to the hazards can very well be reduced by interventions across the human and the built environment system. So with that, what we are here assembled here for this webinar is, in this session we're going to hear about the three perspectives to risk-informed development processes. So the first perspective is going to come in from it's a planner's perspective, and Srinivas sir, who's heading the Metropolitan and Union Territory Division of the Town and Country Planning Organization of the GOI, and who has rendered technical advice and has assisted in policy drafting for urban development across multiple metropolitan cities and UTs. So he will be sharing the planner's perspective. Mr. Adityam Krovidi, the Assistant VP in RMSI, is going to, with decades of experience in NatCat modeling, is going to come in and provide the risk modeling perspective as to how the NatCat models can be utilized for risk-informed planning. And finally, we have Shivangi ma'am, who is going to come in from the community's perspective, and so she has been heading a project of the views from the front line. So the flagship project on views from the front line, which is for over 50 countries across the globe. So she's going to come in and provide an understanding or provide insights as to how communities can be involved in risk-informed development. So over to you, Srinivas.
Hello, Srikant.
Yes, sir.
Can you activate the share? Yeah. Okay. You have activated that share.
Yes.
But I'm not able to share. I have clicked that share.
Just 1 minute, sir.
There is slight correction in my.
Okay. Can you just help with making Srinivas sir as a host?
Just a minute. Because I have clicked at share, but screen has to come. My PPT. I have already opened my PPT.
Yes, sir. So it's visible to us also.
Okay. Good. So I'll make it full screen. Now you are able to. Just a minute. Let me make the full screen. Now you are able to see.
Yes, sir.
Thank you so much. Thank you, National Institute of Disaster Management, for giving me the opportunity to make this presentation. Application of multi-hazard risk assessment for risk-informed development planning. Just 1 minute, I would like to introduce myself. Of course, Srikant mentioned I am heading the Metropolitan and Union Territories Division. My first and foremost task is to provide policy inputs to Ministry of Housing and Urban Affairs, and at the same time in Ministry, I am also dealing with disaster management. Most of the references which comes from NDMA or NIDM, I have to attend with that. And the latest effort which I made is providing a national disaster management plan for urban flooding, which has been submitted to NDMA for formal approval. At the same time, we have also prepared standard operating procedures for urban flooding, which we have been dealing with for past 2-3 years. So let me begin my presentation. I mean, everyone is aware about the the disaster proneness in the world. You can see that during 1980-99, I mean 4,212 disasters were reported, and there is a steep increase in the number of reported disasters. That's around between 2000 to 2019 is 7,348. Total deaths, 1.23 million. I mean, it's a matter of grave concern that so much of deaths have taken place, and at the same time, what has been the impact on the 4.03 billion they have affected, and economic losses has also increased, almost doubled from 1.63 trillion between 1980 to 1999, and it has increased to 3 trillion. This is taken from the latest report, UNDRR, the study report on human cost of disasters. And of course, if you talk about the urbanization, in India, around 32% of people are residing in 7,933 cities and towns. And we are very much curious to know when our census 2021 figures will actually come out. The census preparation will start in 2021, and that will be the most important year, where we are going to get a lot of figures, and it is expected that our urbanization is going to touch between 35 to 36%. Now, population growth and rapid urbanization, and they are driving the increase in disaster risk. So to what extent our urban population is prone to disasters, that has to be really seen. And the United Nations estimates says that more than 2/3 of the world population will live in cities by 2050. And in fact, in the context of India, it's 50% of the population. It is expected 50% of the population is going to reside in 10,000 plus cities and towns. Right now, we have 7,933. The bank after such report, this is the latest report explains that these trends could be $158 trillion in assets at risk from river and coastal flood alone. What to talk about, the earthquake, related disasters. So in the context of India also, our coastal areas, our riverine belts and all, they are, and of course, all the Himalayan states, right from Jammu Kashmir to Arunachal Pradesh, are quite, they are in seismic force zone and vulnerable to the disasters. So, United Nations Disaster Risk Reduction Report, which I mentioned about the global, and with regard to India, almost be the third most disaster-prone country in the world, behind China and USA. And India alone has suffered economic losses of $79.5 billion due to natural disasters during the last decades. And you can see the map. We have a drought-prone areas, hot deserts, cold deserts, flood-prone areas. Of course, if context of the overall settlements, since I have been dealing with the urban areas, being the part of the Ministry of Housing and Urban Affairs, a lot of cities, along the gangetic plains, a lot of cities are prone, and of late, the examples of the Chennai flooding, Mumbai flooding, and Srinagar, and cities in the northeast area are prone to urban flooding. And if you see the causes of, we have natural disasters, biological, geophysical, and hydrological. These are the categories of, the disasters. And of course, going through a very unprecedented situation, pandemic. So there is a growing demand that from, urban development point of view, that how we are going to ensure pandemic resilient cities. We are in fact working on that. We have got, collaboration with Indo-European Union Urban Partnership. We have just drafted the pandemic resilient, metropolitan cities. To ensure, measures taken before the disaster, during the disaster, and after the disaster, it becomes very much important what sort of information, data are required for decision making for planners. And tell you that a lot of criticism is, the plan. Town planners are criticized that they do not mention, or they do not focus on the disaster management aspect. Most of the master plans and development plans, for your kind information, we have 7,933 cities and towns. Till date, we have 2,717 cities and towns which have actually got the master plans. So it's very much important that once we prepare the master plan, we need to know, we need to ascertain what sort of information we would require, and what sort of the the policy recommendation should be there in order to prevent the disasters. Of course, all are aware. I mean, those who are working in disaster area, main character are unpredictability, availability of resources in impacted areas, and dynamic changes in the environment. Unpredictability, of course, implies that severe impacts on people and property during the natural disasters cannot be prescribed with acceptable accuracy. I mean, in fact, we keep on getting in with regard to this sentence. We keep on getting in, through Parliament questions or through Parliament reference, that to what extent the disaster has impacted and what has been the economic losses. Normally, we don't have the figures for that. We always NIDM through sources to provide replies or answers to the parliamentary matters. Of course, cities and towns are vulnerable, and while preparing master plan, it would be utmost important that planners be aware of the data requirements. Disaster management cycle comprises of 4 distinct phases, which are mitigation, preparedness, responses, and recovery. Of course, for multi-hazard risk assessment, in fact, as working in town and city planning organization, I've also got the responsibility of appraising the project proposals, which are actually funded either through multilateral agencies like Asian Development Bank, World Bank. So we are responsible for appraising the projects, and in fact, DFID and all other agencies have also been, working on, having the framework for multi-hazard risk assessment. Multi-hazard risk assessment is the first step in preparing the disaster resilience. Hazards, especially shock stresses, where it might happen, scale and trends, impacts of potential fatalities. Now, mapping of vulnerable areas, primary surveys, this becomes very much important. And of course, once you go for preparation of master plan, either for greenfield cities or if you are preparing master plan for a brownfield cities, I mean, for master plan, generally for brownfield cities, the master plans are either updated or revised. Since focus is now as per the latest emerging, policy perspectives, under the Amrit Mission, we are advocating cities to prepare GIS-based master plan. So once you go for GIS-based master plan, I will discuss a little bit about GIS-based master plan. Mapping of vulnerable areas, much important. Now, especially who are vulnerable, where are the most vulnerable, why are they vulnerable, what makes them vulnerable, and what urban infrastructure are vulnerable. That is very, very much important. Now, these in the GIS-based master plan, you also have very important component, that utility mapping. So it becomes very much important that if you are able to map these areas, map these vulnerables, I think a lot of advanced preparation, lot of advanced steps can be taken to minimize the disaster. The capacity of government and other stakeholders, agencies responsible for pre, during, post disaster management, you need in the standard operating procedures for urban flooding, we could find out number of agencies. In fact, the best standard operating procedures for urban flooding is of Mumbai. Based on that only, we prepared a model SOP for the guidance of the state government. There are more than 20 agencies who are actually responsible. I mean, they have to work in tandem. They have to work in a well-coordinated manner to ensure, the interdepartmental coordination, the SOP for interdepartmental coordination. Then, of course, the role of government agencies are extremely important to ensure interdepartmental coordination. At the same time, if criticism comes that the department are working in silos, they are not communicating each other, the role of NGOs and CBOs also becomes very much important. They can actually come out, they can actually suggest where the interdepartmental coordination is lacking. And of course, reports of different departments will actually provide information on what is the role of the particular department and how it should actually act disaster mitigation. Overall disaster impact assessment, that has to be very, very much it has to be made economic, social, political, environmental, political impacts and potential fatalities, the review of potential scenarios and priorities for action. This has to we as a planner, we come across environmental impact assessment. Okay, then social impact assessment. Say if you are going to have you are going to establish a greenfield township, you are going to acquire land for greenfield, then what SIA has become a mandatory, that say for the the Greater Noida area, where you need to conduct a, it has been negotiated with the farmers, land has been acquired, but you need to conduct social impact assessment. So why not DIA? So we must advocate, and if you are going to conduct a disaster impact assessment, then you need to have lot of data generation, lot of databases you will have to create. And outcome has to be a risk matrix clearly telling that what are the possible the impact, whether what are the adverse impact which are going to happen during the event of disaster. Now our efforts, the town and country planning organization is responsible for monitoring the scheme on formulation of GIS plan. Now the overall objective is to develop common digital geo-reference base maps and land use maps, GIS master plan formation for 500 cities. These 500 cities are those cities which have got more than 1 lakh population. So these are all AMRA cities, and this is one of the reform actually, that cities must have a digital master plan. Cities must have a GIS-based master plan. Of course, all 100, 1 lakh plus cities are going to, and actually this is as per the guidelines, like state mission directors, who are responsible for administering the Amrit mission, the implementing agencies and convey their decision regarding the cities to be taken up. This was done, once that guidelines were formulated and circulated to all the state government, and priority has to be given, or priority was given to the cities which do not have master plans, and those cities whose master plans are about to expire. From a planner's perspective, a master plan is about 20 years. Say, for example, the best example is right now, the master plan of Delhi 2021 is being revised. So we are coming up with the master plan of Delhi 2041. So the priority has been given. It is where the revision is due, master plan revision. Now, which are the techniques? Your special techniques is expected to contribute to other cities, formulate a master plan for decision making, effective land use management and utilization, spatial growth management, enabling project planning, urban management. Now, GIS tools for master plan formulation for ULB's GIS data can be edited, modified, and updated with latest satellite images, ground information. Local attribute data can be updated. This is important in our guidelines. The entire set of data, the information has been given on what lines you have to collect, and what is the master plan depends on the the aggregated data which is available for city as a whole. But at the same time, if you get disaggregated data, especially at the ward level, the decision making, it hastens the decision making. Now, GIS analysis, spatial and attribute data tools required for master plan formulation, online approval and governance for creation within the ULBs according to the approval procedures. I can give an example, like of course it is also important from the disaster management point of view. Like, we have been implementing in coordination with the Municipal Corporation of Delhi and Mumbai, we have totally migrated to online building permission system. Now, online building permission system, earlier it used to take almost 140 days, 160 days to get the plan approvals. Now it has been totally made out online. And also the structural certification, which is very much required, especially if the city is located in seismic zone 3 or 4, wherein you have to certify the the structural certification, which is go for the completion certificate. So that data is absolutely available, the dashboard, and of course through that database one can also ascertain actually requiring the certification. Of course, in the the analog era, it was very difficult to ascertain that which buildings do not have certification. Now all the building plan approval, the certification. Of course, there are buildings which are exempted, especially the low risk buildings, the buildings which have got less than 500 square meter, which are around ground. They are categorized as low risk buildings. Yes, the deliverables, it's basically base map and thematic map, final base map in the form of user friendly special products. 1:4000 have defined layers as per design standards, city town based map and thematic maps, including existing land use map, which is prerequisite for formulation of master plan and other plans. That is very much important that different layers are created, and every city needs to have the existing base map as well as the proposal should be shown on the base map for 20 years perspective. Sector-wise data collection, which includes actually data pertaining to physical, infrastructure, social infrastructure, heritage, disaster point of view, vulnerable areas, data analysis report of 25 experts as per the design standards. There is a publication called Design and Standards for GIS-based, formulation of master plan, which gives detailed data. Now, overall technology, you need to have demarcation of, especially for city. Not only you need to demarcate up municipal boundaries, but you also have to delineate future urbanizable area. In the typical planning terminology, it is known as future planning area, planning municipal boundary and the planning area boundary, where you accommodate future urbanizable area. This is, of course, you need to acquire satellite data, conducted sensing, then topology building, ground truthing. This, all cities are expected to have a geo database creation. That made ground truthing, then valuation from the line department, quality check and vetting, GIS-based map, followed by the primary and secondary survey, spatial attribute data collection, then static map generation. It takes time, especially the attribute data, cutting across different departments, and that too you need to have a standardization, some sort of standardization. Maybe some department have, say, if you are revising the Delhi master plan, maybe water supply department have information till 2018. At the same time, the forest department, they may have a different year. So a lot of standardization need to be done. Then, of course, based on the identification of issues and potentials, you have to come up with the projected requirement, policy formulation, and of course draft. We have been advising that you need to hasten the, once the geo database gets created and acquisition of all the images and delineation. I think it's only initial phase. After that, subsequent modification revisions will not take much time. So this is why of around 496 cities and towns. Some of the cities have opted that they will do on their own. They don't require this assistance. 47 cities and towns have already completed their entire exercise of GIS-based master plan. Now, of course, now these days we are also talking about big data analytics. It's coming up. Evolving trends have opened massive technological resources for reducing disaster risk. Big data defined as technological paradigm that will allow planners to conduct an efficient analysis of vast quantities of data that is made available. Now, there is an important report called UN report, Big Data for Sustainable Development, Data for Climate Change, illustrated examples of big data sources in disaster resilience, including exhaust data, mobile-based financial transaction, transportation, online traces, digital contact, social media, crowdsourcing. So sensing data, physical sensing devices, and remote sensing. Now, this is the best opportunity how planners can really capture these data through crowdsourcing, through social media, through various online resources. It becomes so big data has the integration of diverse data sources and the capability to analyze and use the data, usually in real time, to benefit the population that participates in the disaster situation. Now, major big data sources, especially the emerging ones for disaster management, including satellite imagery, aerial imagery, videos from unmanned, UAVs. Now, drone has come recently. My organization, of course, I was not involved in that. We have brought out the guidelines on, drone-based mapping, which has been approved by, especially for the, of course, for the local. If the master plans are aggregated into zonal plans and local area plan. For local area plans, we can, lot of spatial data can be generated through, the drones. Then sensor web, Internet of Things, airborne and terrestrial light detection, ranging LIDAR. That is also being used. Simulation, spatial data, crowdsourcing, social media, and mobile GPS. call data records. Now, outcomes, how it should facilitate mitigation, prevention, forecasting, and predictive analytics, preparedness, monitoring and detection, early warning, census data, response data assessment, and recovery. Let me tell you, since we are also involved in Smart City, I have been involved in Ahmedabad Smart City. I am one of the ministry's nominee in board of director. Now, especially during the pandemic, this integrated command and control center, it has, it has, it has highlighted its role. Now, during the pandemic, integrated command and control center has been leveraged as war rooms. It is 24. Basically, integrated command and control, all smart cities are supposed to establish for monitoring the access to the basic facilities. It can monitor your underground sewer network. It can monitor the drains. It can monitor the water supply. And of course, if the integrated command and control center has got strong interface with GIS, it can have lot of spatial data. And during the pandemic, 24/7 war rooms were multiple departments to coordinate surveillance, contact tracing, helplines. They did live data visualization and database decision making for city authorities. This is the first time, I think. I mean, there are a lot of criticism that smart city, they are not coming up, they are not showing anything, but actually it is a blessing in disguise that integrated command and control system virtually worked throughout during the pandemic in order to facilitate a lot of data, lot of real-time information to facilitate the decision maker to take decision. Then one-stop shop for all initiatives, citizen helpline, complaint platform, counseling, telemedicine center, field visits, mission management units, sanitation efforts, the virtual training center for healthcare. This become, the role really it has come up. Now, notable action taken, data integrated into single pattern for better insights, enabling accurate decision in tough environment, process change alongside technical implementation using PS, public addressing system, variable message display for citywide visiting. Then ecosystem of partners to deliver outcomes such as public sector NGOs in city response. For example, Bhopal took two major consulting companies, HP and PwC, to help and to build its ICC COVID-19 tracking dashboard. Now, these are the some of the photographs how the integrated command and control they have been working for surveillance and dashboard, real-time patient tracking, online training center, online medical consultation, patient support platform, and 24/7 citizen helplines. Now it becomes very much important. It will take a little bit time once we will have the GIS interface. Straight away, the integrated command and control room should also work in the grievance redressal, especially in Ahmedabad. I have seen that they take a lot of advanced preparation. It comes it is shown on the map that which areas are actually vulnerable for the urban flooding. And before the monsoon season, they will have advanced preparation. At least they will highlight the low-lying areas and where the pumps are actually have to be located in case of heavy downpour, and all the preparations are done accordingly. So of course that's very much important. Mainstreaming disaster management in master plan process. In fact, yesterday we had a discussion on master plan Delhi 2041. We have been discussing, and disaster management will be an integral part of master plan. MPD 2021. It never discussed much about the disaster management. Now, area-based strategy being adopted by smart cities can make full use of data analytics for advanced preparation in the overall disaster management. This becomes very much important when we have a disaggregated data flow, especially at the ward level. So if the ward level data is available, in fact, we are implementing local area plan and town planning scheme. This is 25 smart cities have been actually identified, and 2 cities have already completed their exercise. So, right at the ward level, you can take, a lot of advanced steps to mitigate the adverse impact of, disaster. And I mentioned that you need to have a strong GIS interface. It will take some time, maybe in another next 2 years. We will have, once the GIS-based master plans are prepared, it will have a strong interface with integrated command, and all the thematic layers and all the thematic mapping can always be shared, wherein you can have, you can easily read. A common man can easily understand which are the disaster-prone areas. Yes, if you have an integrated command and control center, I've got to begin with smart cities, but maybe in future, in next 5 years, all the important cities, all class 1 cities are going to have proactive interdepartmental coordination and GIS-based decision support system to streamline the pre, during, post-disaster measures to ensure both disaster and climate resilient urban areas. This is the future of cities, So I conclude here. I mean, next 5 years will be very critical once we will be having the GIS-based master plan, how we are going to have a strong interface with the integrated command and control center, and then all steps need to be taken to mitigate the adverse impact of disaster management. Thank you very much, and I look forward for further interaction. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Srinivas sir, for giving in a wonderful perspective with regards to what are the information needs for a planner in order to mainstream disaster risk into the development planning process. Now, the key highlights that Srinivas sir has indicated are the unpredictable nature of disasters, the uncertainties, and the dire need for some sort of an idea for potential disaster impacts that can help in prioritization of action for disaster risk reduction. So basically, to get a sense of where are the shocks, where are the threats, where exactly lies the vulnerability, and what is the level of vulnerabilities, and also to give a sense of who can be involved in risk reduction. So with that, I request Adityam sir to come over and provide his insights on how NatCat modeling or quantitative risk assessment can help in facilitating informed risk reduction measures. So just to give a brief about Adityam sir, he is the Assistant Vice President at RMSI and has over 3 decades of experience in engineering, IT and insurance industries, and especially the development of natural catastrophe models for DRR. So we believe it's appropriate to provide insights on what are the information that is available for risk-informed development. Over to you, sir.
Thank you, Lakshman. Can you hear me now?
Yes, sir.
You can see my slides.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, very much we can see.
Okay, thank you. First of all, I thank NIDM for this opportunity to share our thoughts. There is slight change in the title of my presentation. Mr. Srinivas talked about a lot of tools and technologies for disaster risk management. My presentation is focusing on some of those tools, especially the NatCat modeling, how we can use it to generate risk information for development planning. We are aware that there is this Sendai framework for disaster risk reduction during the period 2015 to 2030. We have already crossed the 1/3 milestone. If you look at closely this document, you will see some keywords with respect to risk information, vulnerability, exposure, hazard, even risk financing, risk transfer, insurance. It also talks about the public-private partnerships. So these are some of the keywords that drive my presentation. So you will see here, there is one particular target which is talking about the risk information and assessments. And there are 4 priorities for action. Of them, 2 priorities clearly mention about the vulnerability, exposure, and hazard for disaster preparedness and response, and also the risk transfer and insurance. So we will see some of these things during the course of the presentation. We do risk assessments through NatCat modeling. This NatCat modeling in a scientific manner has been around nearly now 30 to 40 years. It started in the universities of US initially, and then slowly it has spread to various parts of the world. Initially, this was promoted by the insurance industry, but later this has made inroads into the public sector, the multilateral development agencies like the World Bank, ADB, etc. They're all now promoting this kind of scientific NatCat modeling for risk assessment. Risk assessments have been around both in qualitative and quantitative. So this presentation talks more about the quantitative aspects of risk assessment. If you see the chart here, I'm showing this as GIS layers. So it goes from the bottom layer to the top. Initially, we identify the study region. Wherever we want to do the NatCat model, first you need to identify what is your area of interest. And then we characterize the hazard. What are the hazards that are likely to impact this region? And typically we rely on the historical information. And then we understand the exposure. We have to define the exposure. Exposure is basically the assets, both the properties as well as people. We need to identify those, we need to define them, we need to evaluate them. And then at the fourth layer, we have the vulnerability, how these assets are vulnerable to various hazards. And once we quantify that, what we get at this point is the damage for properties. And for populations, it is more in terms of indices, some social vulnerability indices. So this layer will give us the damage part of the assessment. And finally, in the fifth layer, this damage is translated into the losses, into the rupee losses for the financial risk management requirements. Just taking a step back, why do we need NatCat models? If you look at the disasters historically, these events, their losses, they are not complete. In the sense, let me give you an example. Suppose if you take flood, typically the historical records will give you about 50 to 60 or 70 years of historical information, how the floods have been historically. And if you look at losses, they will be even less. You don't get generally more than 20, 30 years of loss information. And if you take really some, too far into history, the losses will not be relevant today because the built environment has completely changed. So the historical information is always limited, even in the case of earthquakes, where we typically have longer records, like 100 or 150 years. But if you look at the natural phenomena, I mean, the time scales are quite large, right? For millennia, these hazards are happening, especially in the case of volcanoes. These are very rare events. So even a 500-year historical record will be quite insufficient to do any assessments. Models also provide a representation of this complex phenomena. A lot of these hazards are quite complex. So models can represent this complex phenomena through mathematical formulations. Then they also allow for the calculation of future expected losses. And that's where we have a lot of interest. What will be the losses going forward? So that's what you get mainly from the models. And they also provide you an idea of the uncertainty around these results. Because all the models have some assumptions, some limitations of data, and those things will impact the the accuracy of the results. So models also provide you some kind of uncertainty around the results. They also provide a common framework. For example, if you see the bottom chart, this is generally the standard framework through which NatCat modeling is done. So these models, they follow a common framework. And through this, what happens is you can actually compare different hazards, you can compare different regions. So you will find some basis to make comparisons across hazards, across regions. And finally, you have better information. You're not just looking at the historical experience. you have some information that can indicate the future performance of these disasters, and they help you make better decisions. Just quickly through this framework, I'm not going into too many technical details, but broadly, there are 4 modules in any NatCat modeling. In the first module, we generate stochastic events. As I mentioned earlier, the historical events are quite limited and the durations are only 50, 100 years, not more than that. So we use that information and then we project these events into the future, even 1,000 years, 10,000 years. So we do the simulations and we generate potential future events. And in the next module, taking each of these potential events, we calculate what is the, in the case of earthquake, for example, what is the ground shaking, what is the expected ground shaking. We do these calculations at every location. What is the distribution of this ground shaking for each event? In the next module, at a particular location, now we know what is the hazard. Say, for example, what is the ground shaking for a particular event? Then what would be the damage for the building at that location? So we call this as vulnerability module. We analyze the vulnerability of the built environment, the buildings, the infrastructure, and also the populations. So we build what is called vulnerability functions, and using those functions, we arrive at what is the damage. And in the last module, this damage is converted into a rupee loss, a financial loss, and also how this loss is distributed between different stakeholders. So all this is done in the financial module. The next couple of slides, they give you some more information about each of these modules and how these modules will generate the risk information and how this information can be utilized in planning. So let us take the hazard information. A lot of hazard information is generated during the NatCat modeling. For example, we generate what is called hazard maps or susceptibility maps. People also call these as return period hazard maps because these hazard maps typically have 3 things in them. One is the frequency, and that is represented by the return period. And what is the severity? Meaning how much is the hazard at any location, means the distribution of hazard. For example, the picture on the right side, the map is showing 2,475-year return period. See, these are certain standards that we follow. So what this means is there is 2% chance of exceedance in 50 years. So these are certain standards we follow. So for this return period, what is the ground shaking in the Kashmir Valley? So this is coming through a project, through a model. So this one is showing you there is a legend which is showing the what is the hazard, and this hazard is represented by what is called peak ground acceleration, and that is the parameter that defines the hazard. So you can see the scale from 0 to 1.3, how this PGA is distributed across the Kashmir Valley. So these kind of hazard maps are generated through NatCat modeling. Another area where this information is used is impact forecasting. During live events, for example, there is an impending cyclone, and we get advisories typically 3 to 4 days in advance. And there is also a projected track for the cyclone and the likely landfall of that event. So we get these typical advisories from India Meteorological Department. And once we have this advisory, we take these advisories and then we run some models in the real time to generate wind speed distribution maps or flood inundation maps. So these can be generated in the real time. So you have a lot of information beforehand to basically to mobilize your resources for response. So impact forecasting for live events is one application. Then we can also see what are the climate change impacts. For example, we have these from IPCC. We have some climate scenarios. So using those scenarios, so you can see what would be the hazard, say in the year 2040 or 2060, whatever, 30, 40, 50 years from now, and then what would be those impacts. So using models, you can do these scenario analysis and you can get a lot of information right now to do your planning for the next, maybe decades. So all these hazard maps, etc., they are used for land use planning. You can also identify the hotspots for mitigation, especially if you want to invest in disaster risk reduction. You need to identify certain hotspots because you can't have unlimited resources to invest on larger scales. For example, for a city, you need to know which pin codes or which wards are hotspots for, say, floods, for example. So you can divert your resources to those hotspots. Okay, the next important input, as I have shown earlier in the GIS layers, is the exposure information. We compile a lot of the exposure data during NatCat modeling because hazard is fine, hazard is given, but hazard converts into risk depending on the exposure. If you don't have exposure, there is no risk. So you need to understand where is your exposure. So what we do is typically we do an inventory of all assets. We count, we value each and every building, infrastructure, even people. So the complete economic assets as well as the population, we do an inventory. And we do the spatial distribution of these assets, where they are located, their characteristics. For example, if you take buildings, then you need to know certain characteristics to understand the vulnerability of buildings. For example, what is the material of the building? Is it a concrete building? Is it a steel building? Or is it a simply a masonry structure? So we capture some of these attributes. For example, height of the building, how many number of floors are there. So some of these attribute information we capture. And also the economic value. What is the value of the building if this building was to be replaced? So replacement values we calculate. So we do a whole lot of exercise using publicly available data and sometimes undertaking field surveys. We rely on a lot of data sources, right from the population census or housing census, or any other data that is publicly available. We lay our hands on. We do the field surveys to understand the vulnerability of the assets, and then we prepare these inventories, typically in a GIS database, as Mr. Srinivas highlighted earlier, how GIS is used in the disaster management. So we use a lot of GIS technologies to capture this data and archive this data into databases. The benefit is, you should know your assets. Just like people say these days, know your client, KYC, that's quite popular now. So similarly, you should also know your assets, KYA, something like that. So you need to know where your assets are and their characteristics. Here I am showing just an example. The right side map is showing Anantnag district in Jammu and Kashmir. It is showing the residential, commercial, and industrial exposure in terms of, I think, value. at a very fine scale, probably pin code or watt. So this is one GIS layer within the exposure database. And on the left side, you can see the value. As I said, we do the valuation of assets. So here you are seeing the valuation by tehsil. So in each tehsil, what is the distribution of these industrial, commercial, and residential buildings? Okay, the next important layer in NatCat modeling is vulnerability information. When I talk about vulnerability, there are different kinds of vulnerability. If you are looking at the buildings or the infrastructure, then we are talking about physical vulnerability. If you are looking at population, then it is social vulnerability. And then finally, you will have economic vulnerability, because all this vulnerability will finally lead to economic vulnerability. That's why whenever you have any major disasters happening in any region, they have direct impact on, for example, some macroeconomic indices like GDP, or even income levels of people. So there are some direct and indirect impacts of the natural disaster losses. So we study these vulnerabilities. For example, if I take buildings, as the photo there is showing, there is a damage to the building due to an earthquake in Japan. So this building is like 100% damage. So this building has to be replaced. So how do we understand these vulnerabilities? So engineers, structural engineers, they work a lot, and they also do some laboratory experiments. They actually construct these type of buildings typically in laboratories, and they shake them on a shaking table for earthquake, to study the earthquake response. And finally, what they give us is the chart I'm showing here. These are called damage functions. So on the x-axis, you have the hazard. For example, in this case, probably this is MMI, for earthquakes. And then on the vertical axis, you have the damage ratio. It is called mean damage ratio. And these different curves are showing different, building materials, how these buildings are constructed. For example, wood frame, reinforced concrete, masonry. So for different types of buildings, we get these kind of damage functions. So these damage functions are used to arrive at the damage, how much is the damage for any particular hazard. I'm not again going into a lot of technical details. I'm keeping it a bit high level. On the right side, there is a chart again showing the Anantnag district in Jammu and Kashmir. This is showing the social vulnerability index. This is how typically the social vulnerability is represented. And here this is represented at the tehsil level. So you can clearly see which are the tehsils that are socially highly vulnerable, and those that are less vulnerable. The benefits of this vulnerability analysis is you can do better rehabilitation. After disaster, you have to rehabilitate people. So if you know the vulnerability of the assets, then you can do a better rehabilitation. You can also do retrofitting. You can't rehabilitate everybody because they have their homes. So what you do is, where possible, you retrofit, meaning you strengthen the buildings by investing something into the property, so that they are in future better performed for hazards. And then reconstruction. Suppose if there is a complete destruction of any area, then the only option is you reconstruct. So when you reconstruct, again, you take into account the vulnerabilities that you have already studied. For example, if an area is earthquake prone, and there are certain features which are responsible for the destruction, so you can take better designs when you reconstruct. So it is called build back better. That is the key phrase to do reconstruction. So how do you build back better? You do that only when you understand the vulnerabilities that were responsible for the destruction. Finally, these CAT models, they provide certain outputs. So there are again certain metrics which come out of the NatCat models, and we use these metrics to prepare our own maps, our financial planning, etc. There are a lot of utilities for these risk outputs. Especially insurance companies use this information into their financial risk management. Let me briefly tell you what these risk metrics are. At a fundamental level, you get what is called event loss table. As I said, when we do NatCat modeling, we have these stochastic events, the potential events in future. So these events are typically in thousands. Typically, we get 10,000 events out of a NatCat model. So for all these events, what could be the future losses? So you get that from the event loss table. And there is something called average annual loss. Okay, we know how the future losses are going to be, but then on an average, what would be the losses going forward? So that is called average annual loss. What do you expect on average every year? Loss from any particular hazard. Loss cost is simply a normalized AAL, because AAL is dependent on the exposure you have put into the model. So more the exposure, more AAL. So we normalize AAL by dividing this by the unit of the exposure. So you get a normalized AAL, okay? So which removes the effect of the exposure. Then one very important output from the NatCat models is called loss exceedance curves or exceedance probability curves, EP curves. EP curves are extremely important to do financial risk management. These are fundamental. So on the right side, I'm showing one loss exceedance curve. What it tells us is, given a particular loss, what is the probability of exceeding that loss in any given year? For example, I say that there is an X amount of loss in a state because of earthquakes, and this loss in any given year, has a chance of exceeding 1%, for example. People put this as into return periods also. 1 by EP is return period. So people also say that if it has 1% chance of exceeding in any given year, then it is a 100-year return period event. 100-year return period means if you take a very long time, okay, then what is the recurrence interval of this loss? Okay, if you take a very long period of time, say for example 1,000 years or 10,000 years, then if you say this is a 100-year return period loss, so this particular loss has a recurrence interval of 100 years on average. So that is the next one. What is the probable maximum loss, or what is the return period loss? So this EP curve, and from EP curve these return period losses, this forms the basis for doing any financial protection. For example, governments or anybody, any institution, they protect themselves financially for a certain return period loss. It could be 50 years, it could be 100 years, it could be even 500 years. So you know the expected loss, and then you try to financially protect yourself from that loss event. And lastly, there is something called tail value at risk. Not so much relevant for this discussion, but this is simply at the tail of the curve, if you look at the chart here, so for higher losses, if you go to the right side, that's where you have very high losses. For high losses, of course, the probability will be less. So at any point, if you draw a line, then if you want to understand what is the probability of those losses happening, the high value losses, then you look at the tail value at risk. The tables below are showing some examples from a project. So the left side table is showing what is the average annual loss, say for infrastructure, bridges, culverts, national highways, state highways. Yeah, I think this is in PNG, Papua New Guinea, in that country. On the right side, you have the probable maximum loss. As I said, this is also called return period loss. So here it is showing 100 years, 500 years, 2,500 years loss, again, for the infrastructure. So on the left side, you have average annual loss. On the right side, you have return period losses. Fine. So we use all that output, basically the loss information, to do risk reductions. How do we do that? This slide is showing flood as an example. If you look at broadly, how do we do the risk reduction strategies? We can either protect, accommodate, retreat, or avoid. Let me explain. Protect means, in the case of flood, you protect the communities from the occurrence of the flood. Okay, you take certain measures so that the flood doesn't come to the communities. Accommodate means, this is like adaptation. You can't move the people and properties, but you take certain measures so that the impact is limited. For example, in the case of a flood, if you put your plinth level above a certain flood level, okay, then your house is protected. Just like, when it is raining, you take umbrella, right? So similarly, when you know that what is the likelihood of flooding, and this is where the NatCat modeling helps you. So if you know what is the level of a 100-year return period flood, so you know what is the level of that flood at a particular location, and then you try to put your plinth level at that level so that the flood doesn't enter your house. Retreat means, this is you reduce the impacts. You try to limit. You don't aggressively develop the areas where there is a high hazard. So you change your master plans. You change the zonation. Maybe you convert your plans into more open spaces, so that the impacts of flood is minimized. And finally, avoid completely, in at least high hazardous areas, any development. Leave the open spaces. Let the nature also have some breathing space. Let me give you one example here. In October this year, there was an unprecedented flood in Hyderabad city, and the reason for that kind of flooding is because Hyderabad city is known as city of rocks and lakes. So there are so many lakes, hundreds of lakes in Hyderabad, or at least there used to be. But now a lot of these lakes have been occupied. A lot of nexus between real estate and politicians, whatnot. So people have built into these lakes. Lakes typically have full tank levels. So people have encroached upon into these full tank level contours, and they built houses, commercial complexes, software companies, whatnot, into around these lakes. So that led to this massive, unprecedented flood in Hyderabad this year. You will see more of these things. Earlier it was Chennai, and now Hyderabad. So you are seeing more and more of this because, because of the reasons I mentioned earlier. So better, you avoid. you avoid building in high hazardous areas. The left chart is showing, again, flood as an example. So there is some initial risk, everywhere there is some initial risk. But if you take certain mitigation measures, the risk starts coming down. So you do land use planning, for example, using the risk information that you already have with you. You do some site-specific tools, like I mentioned, put your plinth level above the flood level. So you take a lot of these non-structural as well as structural measures, and slowly you reduce the risk. So at a certain point, you also need to take flood insurance, because beyond a point, you can't completely eliminate the risk. So there will be some risk left. So at that point, you go for flood insurance. And even after you take flood insurance, still there will be some residual risk, but that's fine. It doesn't cause any major problems to anyone. So even after flood insurance, there will be some residual risk. And also flood insurance, any insurance is expensive. So insurance is typically the last chapter in a risk management book.
Aditya sir, if you could just summarize, be good.
Sure. Okay, I'm not going into details of these interventions. As I said, you can do a lot of structural measures to limit the impacts of the flood. One thing that I would like to highlight is, as I said earlier, risk financing and insurance is also, a way to manage the disasters. And especially for this, you need CAT modeling outputs, because you want to understand what are the financial impacts from the natural disasters to do any financial risk planning. There are a whole lot of instruments available when it comes to risk financing and insurance. So right from the bottom of the pyramid to the top, these instruments are aimed at for different target communities. I'm not going into the details, but just to give you the idea that there are so many financial instruments available targeting different layers of the society. Okay, this is my last slide. Disaster risk information is critical to disaster management. You do NatCat modeling for risk assessment. So this is the quantitative way of arriving at the risk information. Risk resilient development requires disaster risk resilience. You achieve economic resilience through disaster risk resilience. You make policies and regulations, and land use planning helps that. You create master plans, you create zones. So to creating these plans and zones, you need the risk information. You do investments in disaster risk reduction. So these are the structural interventions. So you have to do cost benefit analysis. And to do the cost benefit analysis, you require quantitative inputs like CAT modeling outputs. And there is also this early warning systems and communication. As I said earlier, even though you have the event advisories from the agencies, you also need to do impact forecasting, where this is going to impact, which communities are going to be impacted more. You need to have this, and for that you require in the real time running of the NatCat models. And finally, the risk transfer, we just talked about that. You will retain the risk to the extent possible, but finally, you have to do some kind of risk financing. For that, you may have to go for insurance. So that's all from me. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Aditya sir, for giving an in-detailed description as to how we can quantify the expected losses and arrive at an estimate of the future losses that can be expected due to various hazards. By NatCat modeling, how we can generate information such as hazards, vulnerability, and risk information that can help in prioritizing and planning for risk-informed development. Now, with this, we have looked at the planning perspective, and we have also looked at the risk assessment perspective, the technological perspectives as such, if I can state it. And what we are moving on next is to Shivangi ma'am, who's been who's been in the humanitarian and development sector for the last more than about 2 decades, and she leads the flagship program called Views from the Frontline that is over 50 countries across the globe, and that she will explain more in details about this. But basically, I believe that she is apt to provide insights on how the community can be involved in risk and resilience. Over to you, ma'am.
Thank you, Lakshman, and I hope you are able to see the slides. That is probably.
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am.
Yeah. All right.
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah. So, thank you. First of all, thank you NIDM and RMSI to give me this opportunity to speak today from the perspective of community. And my predecessors have given lots of information on the technical aspects of it, and which is really very helpful when I come from when I see it from the community's lens. Just a brief introduction about GNDR, who you may not be aware of. GNDR is a global network of civil societies for disaster reduction, and it's a network of civil societies across the world. We have more than 1,500 members who are working in various aspects of risk reduction, climate change adaptation, and building resilience of the communities. We are spread across almost 114 countries, if I'm not wrong, across the world now. Views from the Frontline per se has been the flagship program of GNDR. Views from the Frontline
Sorry,
2019. Yes.
Sorry to interrupt in between. I think the voice is not either loud or clear, ma'am. Sorry.
All right. Let me just check because. Can you hear me now?
Yes, ma'am, but it's not clear enough.
Wait a moment. I don't know if anything is to do with my setting. Let me just check my setting if that's okay. Can you hear me now?
Yes, ma'am.
Is it audible, right?
Yes,
Am I audible
Yes,
now?
sorry.
yes, ma'am.
Yeah. So what I was saying was that Views from the Frontline 2019 is the fifth iteration of the flag program of GNDR. Basically, we are covering 50 countries across 5 regions, which includes America, Arab states, Africa, Asia, Asia Pacific, and Central Asia. The main purpose of Views from the Frontline has been to clearly identify the gaps between policies and practice. And we hear about SFDRR, and we do know about Paris Agreement, we do know about urban agenda. So we have those policy frameworks in place, and the most critical aspect is that, you know, what changes the life of people if those policies are implemented, and does it really kind of percolate to the community level? So Views from the Frontline, what it does is that it kind of takes the perspective of people in these countries on risk and resilience. We cover 3 aspects: risk profile, risk governance, and of late we have been talking about, you know, synergies or coherence between these different strategies, and it becomes very much relevant when we start talking at the community level. What I'm going to present you is what we have kind of extracted or drawn 9 conclusions out of the data that collected in the process. So it is I'm sorry for that thing. We have collected voices from 750 communities across the world, and we of course through a sampling method and a methodology has been followed. We have come to find out the reasons that what impacts the lives of people. Why are people still losing their lives and livelihood of the disaster? So far, the research goes, we have conducted a global review of disaster risk, and we have interviewed more than 100,000 people. As I speak, we have actually interviewed 105,000 people in 43 of the world's most disaster-prone countries. And 9 conclusions have been drawn from the data that explains why people are still losing their lives and incomes to this flood, droughts, conflicts, and infectious diseases. So what are these 9 conclusions? This first, complex threats needs integrated solutions. We know that what we found out in pandemic, that it was not only about pandemic, but it was also about storm at some places, at floods about some places, and the environment is becoming very, very dynamic. The risk environment is becoming very dynamic. So it's not going to be one hazard, one solution. It has to be integrated solution. You are looking at various complexities in the given risk environment itself. The other one was community exclusion, and some of them I am going to go in detail, but not all of them because of the paucity of time. I think community exclusion somehow has startlingly come out of almost all the countries, and there could be different factors which would be preventing inclusion of the people. It could be just as simple as people not being provided time with, or the community meetings are not happening at time, and the local stakeholders or local government exclude some communities, include some communities because of the power dynamics that the community that is present in the community itself. Poor planning of participation. I think this is more related to people who are in terrain, people who are living in the hills and things like that. So while the risk exposure is very high at some level, but then there is poor planning of participation of these communities because of maybe where they are located at, or maybe there is a poor accessibility, things like that. Responsibility is not appointed. What we mean is that while the government do have structures, by the if we take example of India, we do have Disaster Management Act, which is clearly defining the roles and responsibilities until the last mile. What we see is that there is still gap in the structures. There is still gap in the in mechanisms. There's still gap in policy implementation. We have been talking about build capacities for very, very long time. So that's one of the conclusions that we have. Then information gap itself. We have lots of information. We have seen that we have all this information that we have been talking about since last 1 hour, and there are more. But is it reaching to the right people? Is it reaching to the people most at risk? And we will definitely find that there is a gap of reaching this information to the right people. Absence of local funding. I think most of us know that at the local level, money for disaster risk reduction is not available. When I say it's the institutional money which is not available, or if it is available, then the priorities are kind of lost. People don't, local stakeholders, including the local government, actually really don't know how to apply this money for reducing disasters, or adapting to climate change, or building resilience altogether. So we do find we have come across this as one of the conclusions, or one of the findings from the data. Lost voices. All voices are not heard, and women, for example, children and youth, elderly, somehow they are lost and they are not actually captured. Views from the front line particularly have done focus group discussion in each of these countries to find out that what are the what do they feel? What do they mean by risk and resilience? And we have found that one of the key, I would say, key problems or key highlight was that their voices are not heard. They are not part of any planning process. They are not part of any assessments. They are not part of any implementation. And that's where we kind of find these voices are completely lost. They are not heard at all. The second last one is development. Development isn't risk informed, and we know about it, and we have been talking about this in the morning. That we are we are still working in silos, and have seen that emerging as a major gap across the world. That development does not take into consideration the risk factor or adaptive factors or anything which is related to building resilience. For example, they develop bridge, but then they don't take into account the low-lying areas at some places we have seen, which is actually aggravating the risk of farmers who get now often flooded, like in country like Uganda, for example, or in Kenya. We have found this as a major factor which is hindering or wiping out the development gains that what we have achieved so far. And last but not least, we have ecosystems which are really underutilized. The nature-based solutions are still not given that prominence for simple things like land erosion or kind of preventing cyclones through shields and things like that. So we do feel that ecosystems are underutilized, ecosystems are not given that preferences, and that is why sometimes the impact of these disasters is much more than what we envisage. So I'm going to touch upon some three of this conclusions in detail, just to give you the flavor of what did the data say. Starting with community inclusion, and the issue that the people most at risk of being hit by a disaster aren't involved in decisions about how do they reduce their own risk. They feel that the local governments do not include them in assessing threats, preparing policies, plans, and actions, and taking action to reduce the risk. This is nothing that we don't know about it, but then it still persists. So in spite of the fact that we have been talking about community-based disaster management processes, we have been talking about larger involvement of communities, but communities still feel that if I see the data and if I analyze the data, most of them say that yes, we were part of monitoring processes somehow, but we were never part of assessments. We were never part of implementation of what local governments wanted to do to reduce the risk. So this is a lady from Uganda, and she says that the local government sometimes provides me with food, but there is no community inclusion in the plan, the budget. So yes, as a humanitarian response or as a social welfare, she might be receiving the food, but she's never part of the plans and budget. She doesn't know where the money is going to be spent, but she is the one who perhaps would know that where the risks are, and she being in the part of the community knows her risk very well than perhaps the local government would know. So this perception, this change in the perception of, or this difference in the perception of local government versus local communities really lead to this situation that, communities feel that they are not being heard, they are not being included. And therefore, the stress lies on that, local organizations should empower people and also kind of, do advocacy bit with the local government so that their voices are heard. Just to give you any statistics about that, only 16% of people at risk feel included in assessing threats, preparing policies and plans, and taking action to reduce threats. This data is coming out from the while talking to the people, while talking to the local stakeholders like government, local civil societies, and disaggregated group of people. And if you will see, 84% of people feel that they're not included in this whole process. So while we are talking about community participation, we can clearly see that communities are excluded, and this data is coming from 43 countries, so roughly about 600 communities across the world. Just to give you in the perspective of statistics, for example, Pakistan feels that 82% of people with disabilities and 90% of women said they were never included in risk government processes. Now, there's a little better country like Philippines, where only 36 people have kind of said that with people with disabilities, and 30% of women have said they are not consulted in preparation of policies, plans, and actions. Now, this has direct reflection of what is happening per se at the disaster management level, or at the proactiveness of the communities in both the countries to deal with the disasters. And Philippines has been one of the strong countries who have advocated a lot, to an extent, with the help of such data, to amend their disaster management law, make space available, make civil space available within the act for the countries to kind of including people in the process. The next I would go would be information gap, and governments are producing lots of information. We know about this, and this beautiful information we just saw even in the previous sessions. They are producing information about disaster risk and resilience building, but this information isn't reaching in the communities. Disability, language, and choice of communication hinders access to such information. So, for example, this is an example from Odisha, from our own country. In case of heavy rainfall, we get information beforehand from the TV and from loudspeaker announcements, and we are fully prepared. I don't require to go in detail of this. We know that Odisha has been kind of a best practice example for rest of the world in terms of humanitarian response. And this is what is revealed. So even the local communities feel likewise that information is reaching us through this. However, 62% of the community members cannot access any information about the risks they face or plans by their local government to build resilience. This is at global level. So while some of the countries are really doing good, some of the countries still have to kind of still work on this, that how does the information reach them, especially in the African countries. So I'm going to give you an example of Rwanda, for example. Children and youth, find access to information is an elderly, and this is perhaps because of technology access, or because people are using smartphones, and children and youth are more of using such information platforms, and they do get information much faster than elderly, and such information. So what it happens in essence is that having got such information, for example, if this is the conclusion that there is an information gap, then an advocacy or a work towards that can be made to see how the information of policies at the national level can be made accessible to the communities. I think India could be the best example, because now we are using so many platforms to kind of reach out this information through different channels. But there are certain countries who are facing this development. I'm running a little faster because I've been given some time constraint here. And the last one I'm going to talk about is development risk informed. And the issue here is that local development projects rarely take into account risk, as I mentioned earlier. Climate change, adaptation, sustainable development, disaster risk reduction have complementary goals. yet they remain separate in policy and practice. Their legal and institutional frameworks are different, and they sit on different tables to resolve the issue. Now, I don't need to tell the esteemed group that at the community level, they don't understand climate change adaptation. They don't understand disaster risk reduction, or, the different nuances of the disaster risk reduction. What they want is that, how do I protect my life and my livelihood after all? So sitting on the silos is not helping the development process, so to speak. I think we have UNDRR and other UN agency trying to target 2030 SDGs, but unless all these disciplines they come together to achieve a single kind of a single mission or a single goal, I think it is going to be a difficult task. Just to cite an example further is that we know that this is a story again from Odisha, where air pollution is a major issue, but the woman there says that we are helpless because if companies shut down, then what we are going to eat? And more than 60% of men in the locality work in such companies. This is nothing new. So how do you kind of address this situation? These are some findings. These are some conclusions which are coming, and I think a proactive measure requires to be taken to deal with this kind of situation. 67% of these community members and 47% of local government think that the local investment projects don't consider low risk. Now, mind well that even there is a recognition at the local level that 40 at the local government level, to be very honest, that 47% of them are still feeling that the local investment projects don't consider risk, which means there's a huge work that requires to be done to see that this development, whatever is happening, takes into the factor local risk. If they don't do it, then the development gains are going to be wiped off again and again and again. And we have seen that we have many such examples. So within even the country, for example, we know that Indonesia has been very proactive. They have extremely dynamic risk profile, but I think the stance of the government and the community, they do feel that they are much more proactive in terms of taking disaster risk reduction steps. But for example, 50% of people say that public and private investments do not increase disaster risk. Now that's what they are saying, that they do not increase disaster risk. But if you go to the detailing of it, in urban areas, people feel that public and private investment increase disaster risk, but 2.5 people feel, 5% people feel in the rural areas that only 2.5% people feel that public and private investment increase disaster risk. Now this analysis is good enough for us to say that where the development is also taking place. There is a divide between urban and rural area. And therefore, when you analyze the data which is collected, you will find this kind of data coming out, which is very clear on what a community or a family residing in urban area versus a family residing in rural area. What is the difference in the perspective of development being risk informed? I think what helps in this data is that one can design as coming from civil societies, one can design with along with the donor, where does the money have to go. For example, one can sit with the global actors and the national actors and the regional actors with this data to ensure that we are still not working in silos. We have kind of a coherent strategy at the community level, which would help to address this key issue. It's very simple. The issue is about life and livelihood, and the other things are the layers behind that, what we are trying to address through various disciplines and various sciences. So, well, it is up to you to decide in this 9 conclusion, which is the one which you think is the most important finding of VFL conclusions? With these conclusions, we are talking to several government at the international level in different countries. We are trying to work nationally to kind of advocate for some of these conclusions which have come out at the national level. So with this, I would like to end. If you want to see the global report, it is available on the link that is available here on your screen. And I would like to end my presentation here. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, ma'am, for a very engaging insights into the findings and the views from the front line. So from across the globe as such. So now having heard three different perspectives, there are certain questions that have already been put up in the chat boxes. So I'm just picking up one question each for each of the panelists to move forward. So Srinivas sir, for you, the question is primarily around the role of ULBs in risk-informed planning. What can ULBs do?
Yeah. Lakshman, I have already given the answer, but
Yes,
this question is from Mr. I think it is from Jammu Kashmir.
yes, sir.
Yes, first of all, I would like to inform on PRI, Panchayati Raj Institution. We have come up with the RADPFI guidelines. This is known as Rural Area Development Plan Formulation and Implementation Guidelines. This was prepared by us for the Ministry of Panchayati Raj. And this document has been circulated. And the role of Panchayati Raj Institution, in terms of development planning, we have suggested that Gram Panchayat should be taken as an ideal unit for village level planning, because for an individual village it becomes too tough to prepare a plan. For Gram Panchayat, one can make the plan, and then that guidance also has got the mapping, a separate chapter on mapping. So the way we prepare development plan for urban areas, similarly we need to have, and Panchayati Raj institution will have the biggest role, because we had examined that whether these statutory plans can be notified under the Town and Country Planning Act. Basically, the Town and Country Planning takes care of both cities as well as the rural areas. Yes, ULB's roles, unfortunately, till now, urban local bodies, actually, they are not involved in preparation of development plans. Very few cities like Bombay Municipal Corporation of Greater Mumbai, they have prepared the development plan, but it becomes very much important because a lot of information is with the ULBs, and they have to coordinate with the urban development authorities. Like in Uttar Pradesh, most of the urban development authorities are actually involved in preparing the master plan, and in other states, Town and Country Planning Department takes the responsibility of preparing and notifying the master plans or development plans. In some states, it is known as development plans like Haryana, Maharashtra, Gujarat. So the role of municipal corporation, actually, as per the 74 Constitutional Amendment Act and the 12th schedule, the duty of preparing master plan should have been transferred to your local body. But again, local body has to work in coordination with both town planning department and urban development authorities in order to provide all the information, especially with regard to vulnerabilities, because they have got the utility mapping. So based on utility mapping and other thematic maps, you can always have the information on vulnerabilities. Yeah, Lakshman.
Thank you, sir. I hope the question is addressed as such. Now, sir, this question is to you, Adityan, sir. The question was basically dealing with Punjab, but I think the participants would like to know what is the current status of NatCat modeling or multi-hazard risk assessment in India. How many states or cities in India have such studies done?
Okay. Recently, in the last 10-15 years, there have been a lot of initiatives to do the NatCat modeling at different levels, city level, state level, and also the country level. There are various projects, at least I can mention some of the projects that I am aware of. Recently, RMSI has done a project for NDMA. This is the cyclone risk modeling project for the 13 coastal states in India. There are also some other projects where city level NatCat modeling is done. I know some of the cities, just to name some examples, like Vijayawada, Visakhapatnam, Shillong, and a couple of cities in Odisha. Um, um, Even several organizations, like for example, the World Bank, they have a lot of projects going on in India. There are projects from the NDMA, National Disaster Management Authority, and also from the state disaster management authorities. I know recently Jammu and Kashmir, Uttarakhand, and now Andhra Pradesh. These are some of the states where the NatCat modeling has been done or still going on. With reference to Punjab, I'm not quite sure about that particular state, but there are a lot of initiatives right now going on in India.
Thank you so much, sir. Shivangi, hello?
Yes, please. Yes. Yes, Lakshmi.
Yes, yes. Shivangi, ma'am, actually, this question is to you, ma'am. So, ma'am, basically, there is this question that is coming in from one of the participants. He's asking that how can we consider everyone in decision making? I don't think we can consider. So, I would like to refine that question and state probably is how can we consider informal sector or informality in risk informed planning?
I think how do you make communities resilient if you don't hear the voice? That's my counter question. If you don't understand, it's not only about hazards. It's not only about earthquake, floods, or drought or things like that. There are underlying stresses. While when you talk with the community, if you ask them, what is your issue, and they would not come up with floods first. Perhaps they would come with things like alcoholism, for example. So what we are trying to say is that if unemployment is going to be emerging threat and perceived by the community for next 10 years, perhaps it would be good for the government or whoever is the authority there to realize that this is an emerging threat which the community feels. How we are going to address that, and what are the barriers of those actions which are already taking place. And that is why it is important that we take into consideration this challenges or this constraints or this barriers to the actions which are happening, because the community feels that there is an underlying stress which is aggravating their vulnerabilities, and at the time of disaster is aggravating more, because then they are in this whole cycle of poverty again and again. So what VFL has done from the perspective of the project, I'm saying, is that we are not looking at the current profile. The current profile would say cyclone, earthquake, landslide. But when you start asking them about, what is the emerging threat for next decade for them, you will find multiple answers. It could be a natural hazard. It could be anything which is related to socio-economic vulnerability. So what we are trying to say is that you can include people, and by virtue of the act that what we have in our own country as well as in other countries, I think there are beautiful examples where the community leaders and community representatives perhaps are part of this whole process. I think when I say community representative, it's not one individual. He or she is representing the whole of the community. So I would say that if you want to build resilience of the community, you will have to include all the sectors, all the sections of the people. I hope I have addressed the question.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you, ma'am.
Lakshman,
Yes.
Lakshman, if you could kindly permit me.
Yes, please, please.
Yes,
Please,
sir, go ahead.
I have a question for Mr. Adityam. So what are the possibilities of capacity building in NatCat modeling, especially for the town planners?
Okay.
Adityam,
Yeah. Although this is not my area of specialization, but I will, try to throw some ideas.
Okay.
See, the town planners, they need to be educated basically about these NatCat models. So some people need to be trained at least in the fundamentals and in the tools and technologies available. I think that will be the starting point if this is not already there. But as I said earlier, we have done some projects at the city level. So I'm
Okay.
sure those city planners were involved in these initiatives.
Okay.
But as you can see, you have 500 cities with more than
Yeah.
1 lakh population.
Yeah.
So the examples I gave are only just half a dozen of them. So
Okay.
yeah.
Thank you. We'll be in touch with you. Maybe I will take email from your from Srikanth.
Sure.
Yeah. Thanks a
Thank you.
lot for a very informative presentation.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much, sir. Aradhna would like to take over?
Yes, thank you, Lakshman. I've come to the end of the webinar session. There are many questions, as we can see in the chat box. We will not be able to entertain all the questions like currently right now because of time constraints, but definitely all the questions will be mailed to the panelist, and whatever answers the participants want, it will be mailed back to their email address. So I guess in that sense, we complete the question answer round as well. I will sing the vote of thanks. Since we have come to the end of the session, firstly, I would like to thank our Executive Director of NIDM, Major General Manoj Kumar Bindal, for always guiding us and motivating us to conduct various webinar sessions. I would also like to thank our esteemed speakers for the session. We had with us Shri R. Srinivas, Aditya, and Srimati Shivangi Chavda. Thank you to all the presenters, especially for the presentation, which was so insightful, so in depth, and even very sensitive topics were brought up, which was very relevant. And especially in times of pandemic, such questions should be need to put up. And I would also like to thank our coordinators, Dr. Sushma Gule from NIDM, as well as Lakshman Srikanth. Because of them, this webinar has come to the limelight. They have been handling everything from mails to phone calls, everything behind the scenes. So thank you for your time and consideration. And lastly, I would like to thank our participants who have been so patient with us, who have attended the entire webinar session. So thank you to our participants. Before I end this webinar, I would just like to give two instructions. Firstly, the feedback link will be mailed to the participants who have attended a minimum of 90 minutes of this webinar session. And once we receive the feedback from the participants, then the e-certificate will be generated. And the distribution of the e-certificate can take up to 30 days or more. So please have patience with us. Dr. Sushma, shall I end the webinar?
Yeah, thank you so much, Aradhna. On behalf of NIDM, once again, I thank all the esteemed speakers, Srinivas ji, Aditya ji, and Shivangi ma'am. Thank you so much for such a wonderful insight. And we look forward to working together in the future also as well. Thank you all. Thank you to all the participants also for joining us. Be safe. Yes, sir.
Thank you, ma'am.
All right, sir. Have a good day ahead. Bye-bye.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you all.
Lakshman, are you there?
Yes, ma'am. Yeah.
Lakshman, there's one query. Okay, so if you can, somehow get that answered later on, maybe,
Yes, ma'am.
for sure.
That
I mean,
was
through mail.
Meghalaya, right?
Yeah, that Meghalaya thing. I think it came in the last moment. So it would be nice if she gets her answers. So can you
Yes,
do
ma'am.
that?
Sure.
Can you do the
Yes,
needful?
ma'am.
Yeah.
Yes,
All
ma'am.
right. Thank you
If
so
you can
much.
just share Rebornme's email ID, I will respond.
We'll do that. We'll do that. All right.
Yes.
All right. Okay, then. Thank you so much, Lakshman. And have a
Anytime,
good day.
ma'am.
Yeah.
Thank
See
you
you.
so much.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Take care, Radha.
Bye. Thank you.